This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the show. I'm very happy to have Robert Kerbeck. Robert is an author, an actor, and a former corporate spy. And when I heard this story, when this opportunity came up to speak to Robert, I had to jump on it because this story is about as crazy as stories get. I can't wait to get into the details. Robert, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Gabe.
My pleasure. So Robert, I don't even know where to begin, but I think let's start with this idea of being a corporate spy. I've never met a corporate spy. I didn't even know they really existed. Maybe they exist in like James Bond novels or whatever, but I guess there you are. You are the first real corporate spy. And maybe I should correct that and say former corporate spy that I've ever
please.
met. Former corporate spy. And I guess let's go back to the beginning. How does somebody become a corporate spy?
Yeah, well, look, I saw a job listing. No, there's no job listings for corporate spies, right? That's so how do you become a corporate spy? So, the origin story, so to speak, is I'm from Philadelphia and the Kerbeck family is very well known in the automobile business. If any of your listeners are looking for a deal on a Maserati, tell them I sent you. But my great-grandfather sold horse carriages before cars were invented. He became one of the first car dealers in Philadelphia. My grandfather took over that dealership. My father took over that dealership, and I was supposed to take over that dealership. And when I graduated college, I'd kind of fallen in love with acting in college, but I didn't know anyone that had been an actor. I didn't know a soul in New York City, and so I just was afraid to go for it, so to speak. And so I went to work for my father. And the trickery and dishonesty of car sales, it just didn't feel right to me. So finally I did. I got the courage. I left my dad's business. I moved to New York. And of course, who stumbles into a job as a corporate spy? But I needed a survival job, as all actors do, or most actors do. And I only knew one person in New York, and he was my college roommate's brother. And one day he mentioned this job he had, and then he shut up right away like he had said something he wasn't supposed to say. And I said, dude, I'm broke. You got to help me out, And so he very reluctantly got me an interview with this woman who had this mysterious firm. I go up to her apartment. She was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and your listeners may know that's kind of the ritziest area of Manhattan. I go to a doorman building. I was living with two guys in a tiny cave. I go up to the penthouse. This woman opens the door. I seem to recall she had a martini and a cigarette, but maybe that's the writer and me exaggerating slightly. But in any case, the apartment was the nicest apartment I'd ever been into. It looked like it was out of architectural, magazine. So I knew whatever this woman she was doing, it was lucrative. And she begins to have this very strange interview with me. She never asks me anything about my skills. She never asks to see the resume that I have. She sends me on my way. I'm pretty sure I didn't get the job. My buddy calls and says, "You got the job, but don't get too excited," because she hires everyone because no one is able to do this job.
Okay, yeah. And I was going to say, so Robert, so this lady was the owner of this secretive firm that took contracts from clients. Got it. So she was looking for employees. She was building her team.
Right. And she only hired actors. And we'll get into, sort of the obvious reasons why, being a spy, you had to lie and you had to create characters and personas and reasons that people should tell you corporate secrets that they should never in a billion years tell you. So actors, of course, we could do accents. This is Gerhard calling from the office in Frankfurt, Germany. We could do all these crazy things that would fool people. They're like, well, wait a second. There's no way someone's calling me and making up a German accent to get in. It's ludicrous. It would be ridiculous. Nobody's doing that. Well, we were doing that, right? So she learned right away that actors could do accents, were good at improvisation, thinking on their feet. So we were the perfect corporate spies. And so the first day I went out to train at this woman's apartment in Brooklyn, which back in the day, Brooklyn was not full of hipsters with beards and coffee shops. Brooklyn was rough and dangerous. It was the early 90s. Crack epidemic was hitting hard. And I go to this rundown building, go up fourth floor, walk up. This attractive woman opens the door. She says, "Come on in. You'll work in my bedroom." And at that time, I was like, I still had, no idea what the job was. But I was single. So I went, well, okay, And she takes me into her bedroom. There's a futon and a desk. She sits me down at the desk and she says, "What we do is we call major corporations and we use deception and manipulation to get people to tell us private, secret corporate information." And that was the beginning of my apprenticeship as a corporate spy.
And so did you actually get any particular training on what are things you're supposed to say and do? Because at that point, I imagine you don't have a whole lot of corporate experience. Have you ever worked at a Fortune 500 company up to that point?
Never. I have no idea. And in the beginning, I was there to train with her. The training was very short, and you were basically left to, either be able to do it or fail. And I'm here to tell you, of all the people that came in and out of this woman's firm, I was the last one that was successful. And hundreds of people came after me because every actor needed a part-time, flexible job. And remember, we live in this era of COVID now where everybody's working from home, or most people are working from home. Well, in the early 90s, nobody worked from home, So to be able to have a job that you could actually, do on your own schedule, you could work for 2 hours, go to an audition, come back, work 3 hours. It was invaluable. It was a really, great thing. But in the beginning, I really struggled doing the job. I was not good at it because it was very difficult. And the women, the woman who had the firm, she only hired women with the exception of me and my buddy because she felt women were better spies. And the women would use all of these ploys and techniques where they would prey on, they were an assistant and they would be calling another assistant, and they would often cry on the phone call and say, my boss is so horrible and he's yelling at me and I'm going to get fired and I have 2 kids. And the other assistant on the other end of the line would go, "Oh my God, you poor thing. It's okay. My boss is terrible too. What do you need?" And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wait a second, you're crying on the phone and that gets you the information, but it did, I'm like, you claim your boss is a jerk and that's getting you and it did. But we, as guys, we didn't have that. So we had to go, well, what would we, and it took a while, but eventually what we landed on was we would go as if we were actual executives at the corporations. And so we would impersonate real executives, senior executives. We were actors, so we would try to listen to their voices, even if, a lot of people nowadays, you can see them on TV. And so I can practice their accent, their voice. I can learn their vocal, mechanisms. But even back in the day, you could call someone and get their voicemail and, and you'd hear, "Hey, this is Bill Johnson. I'm not here right now. Leave me a message." And you go, "Okay, well, that's Bill's voice. I can do that." And so then you would imitate it. And so we would go executive to executive. And what we were shocked to find out is people that were executives, people that had MBAs from Harvard and Wharton, were easier marks than the receptionists and the assistants. You'd get an executive on the phone, and this guy, you couldn't get him off. He would tell you, and of course, executives had access to even more valuable information. So they would be telling us future plans, strategies, who was good, who the rock stars were at a company, who they were about to fire, anything and everything that a company's biggest rivals would want to know.
And Robert, this was early 90s, right? So this is before the internet. This is just when cell phones are kind of becoming popular. So how did you get information? I mean, I think you just mentioned that you called them up and hopefully get their voicemail to kind of get a reading on their voice or their mannerisms, their pace of speech. But what else can you do to get information on your mark?
Well, I mean, again, in the early days, we would, and even look, corporate spying is alive and well. We can get to that later in the phone call, how corporate spying goes on today, still often via the phone, but also, of course, via email and texting and all different ways that spies, because what spies do is when new technology gets introduced, spies panic that their careers are over. But what we learned is every piece of technology that was introduced to stop us, we ended up turning around and using to our advantage, right? So at one point, again, going back to the 90s, caller ID was introduced. And we were like, oh my God, caller ID is over, because they're going to see that we're calling from a line that perhaps would say Robert Kerbeck or perhaps would say anonymous, and nobody's going to give us that information. Well, what we learned was if we called a company and we got transferred to an executive's office, and then we said to that executive's office, "Oh, I'm sorry, I dialed the wrong number. What I really want is Bill Jones's office. Can you switch me to Bill's office?" And the assistant for this executive would go, "Oh, no worries. Yeah, I know this operators switch to the wrong numbers all the time. No big deal. I'll switch you to Bill's office." So they'd switch us to Bill's office. Well, now our number on the caller ID would show up as the executive that was transferring us. And so now I would be that executive. So the assistant for Bill Jones would answer, go, "Oh, hey, it's Bill Jones's office." And I'd go, "Hey, it's Randy in compliance." And she'd see Randy Johnson in compliance. She'd see his name. And so they would completely believe it because the name. So we use this thing that was designed to stop. I mean, of course, they didn't invent caller ID to stop corporate spying, but it certainly was one of the things that corporations thought would happen. And instead, we turned it against them.
And Robert, how often would companies find out that you or somebody else was spying on them?
Well, I mean, that was always the challenge, is when you're calling a company, as soon as they get wind that corporate spying is, that spies are calling or texting or in this era, trying to get information, they go into lockdown mode. Memos get sent out, emails get sent out, texts get sent out saying, "Look, there's been some phishing, suspicious scamming. Do not give any, blah, blah, blah." And so what we would always want to do is we would never want to create that kind of alarm. And so we, at one point in the book, I describe us as, brain surgeons, which of course we were far from. But the idea being that we're going to go in and we're going to get that tumor out without causing any damage or any inflammation to any of the surrounding tissues. We're going to be really delicate and precise. And so we were very careful. That's why, one of the things I think that made me and my buddy in the book Ruse, his name is Pax, that made us kind of the best out there, and then eventually super sought after spies, being making $2 million a year, was the fact that we would do a lot of research in advance of making any phone call. And in the beginning, because your listeners may wonder this, in the beginning, we did do some in-person stuff. We did go to, a bar where we knew certain firms frequented, or events, or sporting events, or conferences. But what we learned very quickly was that you could get more information using the anonymity of the phone call. And by the way, it is still true today. You can get more information using the anonymity of the phone call than you can by being in person. And of course, being in person was riskier. So we immediately started to go, wait a second, we're getting much more information from these phone calls. And now we don't even have to risk going in person and potentially all of a sudden having the FBI swarm on us because there's been some sort of sting operation, right? So that was a real major revelation for us in the corporate spying game.
And so were you yourself at any point in time in physical danger? Like you ever had to run for your life, or you were like, you felt threatened or was actually threatened?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole chapter in the book on, and again, I don't want to spoil too much for, any, listeners that potentially, go out and get a copy of the book. But at one point, the authorities, and when I say the authorities, every authority, the FBI, the Secret Service, the U.S. Marshals, the NYPD, all these agencies were searching for this individual who at the time was known as the world's greatest hacker. And in their search for the world's greatest hacker, they got on our trail, and me and Pax. And that was...
So just clarify, you were not the world's greatest hacker.
Well, I always tell people, what I do is I don't hack computers, I hack people. So I don't need to hack a computer. I mean, ask my teenager about my technology skills. I mean, mediocre at best. My daughter would give me a C tops. Okay. But I can hack people and get people to tell me anything I want to know, including their passwords. And that's the thing that what a lot of people, especially corporations now that are so focused on cybersecurity, as they should be, but in my humble opinion, they spend far too much time and money focusing on the firewall, the encryption, the network, the server, all of the computer related stuff. and they don't spend enough time on the human element, because the weakest link in cybersecurity is always the human being, right? And so if I can hack your human being, your employee who has access to everything, if I can hack that person, your systems and all the money you spend on the systems are for naught. And I'm here to tell you, most ransomware attacks are performed not by one individual, they're by small teams of people. And one of those team members is always a social engineer, what I call ruser. It's always a ruser who is making initial forays, phone calls, to learn about the system, to learn about how it's set up, and blah, 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 to then give that information to the hacker to make the hacker's job that much easier.
And what type of information were you requested to obtain?
So, I mean, you think about the play, like I'm a football fan, so you think about the playbook for a football team. Imagine if you could get your opponent's playbook 2 or 3 days before the big game. You knew every play, you knew every formation, you knew everything that they were going to do. Trick play, you knew it all. What an advantage that would be. And that's what corporations are interested in, is they're looking for that type of information. So we would always start with building the organizational chart, so we would understand not only who is at a firm, but how they were structured. But more importantly, what we would delineate is who the top people were in each group and department, who the rock stars were. So for example, if it was a sales desk, we'd get these sales rankings, the internal sales rankings. So, because you think about it, if a salesperson goes in for an interview with another company, is he going to tell the other company that he's number 17 on the sales team list? He's going to say, I'm number 2, I'm number 3, I'm number 1. Well, we had the list, so we knew who the top people were. So if your rival, because remember, part of making your company better is not only learning about your rivals, but maybe stealing some of their top people, right? Poaching some of their top people, because not only do you get their talent, but then they bring their secrets with them, right? So we would, if it was a trading team, we would learn who the top traders were. If they were bankers, we would learn who had the biggest bank of business. We would also learn, and this is something your listeners may not know, most corporations have ranking systems, that they have an internal metric within their company that they use to rank people. We would find out that. We would find out everyone's salaries, which is, of course, a form of ranking, right? So we would get all of this information, and then we would begin to find out other things. Or were they expanding? Were they about to lay off people? Did the CEO have a drinking problem? Was he in rehab? Anything and everything that a company could use to their advantage.
Incredible. And what kind of, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of money were you making? Or what? There must have been a really good financial incentive for you to do this, right?
Well, the funny thing is, I took the job because I was an actor, right? And when we first started out, we were getting $8 an hour, which, even back in the day, it was not a lot of money. I guess it would be equivalent to, $15 an hour now. It's basically kind of just a subsistence job, just enough to pay the bills, and that's about it, right? But we were actors. We didn't care. We were going to be famous. And I was a working actor. And, one of the things I'm most proud about with Ruse is that it's kind of 2 books. It's a corporate spying, corporate espionage book, but it's also it's like a Hollywood tell-all book, because one chapter I'm spying, and then the next chapter I'm working with O.J. Simpson the week before the murders, right? And then there's the spying chapter, and then I'm drinking beers with Paul Newman and peeing next to Al Pacino and getting hit on by Kevin Spacey, right? And taking J-Lo on a date, So it's kind of 2 books in one. So I think Ruse is a lot of fun for that reason.
That's amazing. Sorry, if I understand you correctly, you have this sort of daytime job in New York where you're doing this espionage thing, and then on your off time you're flying to Hollywood and you're working as an actor at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Okay.
Yeah. And at a certain point, I moved to Los Angeles. So then I was doing the spying kind of during the day, in between auditions, and then I would do an episode of Star Trek, and I would be a working actor for 2 weeks. But the thing about acting is, when a job ends, you're unemployed again. So, I do Star Trek or Melrose Place or ER or NYPD Blue, all of which shows that I did with big parts. And then I'd be unemployed again. So I would go back to the spying because, I knew I couldn't count on acting for money. So, yeah, it was pretty crazy. And I think, again, that's what I think is, I wrote the book during COVID. And so it was really important. We all went through this terrible thing. I said, I want to write a book that is fun. I want to write a book that's a page turner. And so I've been fortunate. A lot of the reviews have described Ruse that it reads like a spy novel, but it's all true. I've written a true book about lying.
That's incredible. And just for our listeners, we'll get to more information about the book later in the show, but the book is called Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. And Robert will tell you all about it toward the end of the show. And I mean, it sounds like it's a really interesting book. And so you had this double life going. During this time, Robert, was anyone aware that you had this part-time life as a corporate spy?
You know, I would never tell people for obvious reasons, but there were some friends that I told because they started to see that I began to make more money. And what was started out as an $8 an hour survival job, all of a sudden the income started to go up, and it went up exponentially so rapidly it surprised even me. One year I was making, I wasn't even making, whatever, $50,000, and then all of a sudden the next year it was 150. Then the next year it was 350. Then the next year it was 700. Then it was $1 million. It was insane because what happened was people began to learn about me through word of mouth, and so bigger and bigger companies started coming to me. And they saw the results. They knew that I was getting this incredible data, which was worth, whatever they were paying me was worth, 100 times what they were paying me, 1,000 times what they were paying me. I mean, one story that I detail in the book, my spying, resulted in, basically potentially $1 billion worth of business moving from one corporation to another. Now, can I say that I was responsible for $1 billion? No, but I can say I was responsible for a large portion of $1 billion in added revenue to a particular company. Right? That's how valuable this information. That's how valuable corporate spying can be. Think about it. If you were able to poach one of the early designers of the iPad from Apple back in the day, and you were able to get that individual and the knowledge that that individual, and maybe that individual brings one or two team members over to your firm, how much information would that have been worth? Right?
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, and in your book, do you actually talk about the specifics? Do you name any companies in particular or no?
I do name companies, but when I'm talking about the spying that I did, I've changed the names of the companies because while the statute of limitations for whatever crimes I may or may not have committed has expired, which of course is why I can write and publish Ruse, these companies have armies of attorneys on staff. And so even though, a long time has passed, they could still make my life miserable and, basically attorney me to death. And the publisher and I just decided it wasn't worth the risk. And so we've changed the names of the companies.
Very interesting. And so typically how long would an assignment last? I mean, when your employer tells you, Robert, go hit up this company, maybe this executive, this is the kind of information we're looking for. How long would one of those assignments last?
I would say a corporate spying engagement lasted anywhere from a few weeks to a few months.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like it was a lot of fun. It sounds like it was right up your alley being an actor. Why did you leave the industry?
Well, and this is all, I delineate all this in the books. I don't want to spoil too much, but, when the crash of 2008 came, the corporate spying kind of died because corporations were no longer spending money to spy on their rivals. They were just trying to survive, right? Remember, we had to bail out General Motors, and Lehman Brothers went under, and Bear Stearns was sold, and, companies were, everybody was going broke. And so corporations were battening down the hatches. So all of a sudden I had no income, and now I had a mortgage and I had a family. And so I needed to take a job. And so I actually went and took my first job in corporate America. And what was shocking to me, maybe not to your listeners, but what was shocking to me was how much lying, how much backstabbing, how much office politics there was. And the lying, here I was doing the lying on the phone, which I thought was terrible. But the lying done in corporations was face to face and far worse. So if any of your listeners go out and they pick up a copy of the book and they're reading it and they're kind of getting bummed out at me tricking this person and tricking that person, hang in there, reader, because I get my comeuppance later in the book where I go work in corporate America and everyone is rusing me. And all of a sudden I become the sucker. I become the dupe because here I was under the mistaken apprehension, again, many of your listeners, that, well, when I go work in a corporation, we're all on the same team, right? We're all there to help each other, to make the company better, and we're all pulling for each other. And I'm here to tell you, based on my experience, no, 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 no. Everybody was out for themselves. Everybody wanted to they wanted to be the one get promoted. They wanted the one to have the bigger bonus check, the better office. And so people would constantly tell you one thing to your face, but then behind your back, they were scheming against you. And that I just was clueless as to how cutthroat, in this case, I was working on Wall Street, but I've now experienced it in other industries too, the tech industry, pharmaceutical industry, automobile industry, I mean, corporate America, and that's what we talk about, corporate culture. Most corporations have a toxic corporate culture. And a lot of CEO types would argue that type of cutthroat dog eat dog is not toxic. They would say that that's what the capitalist system is supposed to be, that you're supposed to be trying your best to get up on your teammates and fellow company members because we want you striving to succeed. And for you to succeed, it means somebody else has got to fail. And too bad, I don't particularly agree with that, but I think it's pretty common.
You're absolutely 100% correct. And thank you for bringing that up. So I've been working in corporate America now for the better part of 20 years. And, some of that time was in the Midwest in manufacturing. And for the last 7 years or so, I've been here in the San Francisco Bay Area in tech, both very large firms. And I can tell you that, yes, corporate life is extremely cutthroat. And yes, people are always trying to angle, and they always have some angle on how to, one up you and one up each other. And like I said, everyone's fighting for that one promotion, that one bonus. And it is very cutthroat, very, like I said, backstabby, et cetera. So I know exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had spoken to you when I took this job in corporate America and you had told me those things because I didn't really understand that. And I think that's one of the fun things about the book is here's this guy who's the master deceiver, but then he goes into the corporate world and I was so naive, I was just so clueless that I thought these people were like my family. We were going out to dinner every day after work and we were traveling on business together, sitting next to each other on the plane, talking about sports and music and I thought these people were, my pals.
No. You know what's funny is when I used to work in manufacturing in the Michigan area, there it was quite obvious, they're like, it's a very high stress environment. And if someone doesn't like you, they'll just yell at your face and they'll tell you to F off. And so who likes you and who doesn't. Yeah. Here, and it's funny, California, everyone's all like friendly. And so here you think people are friendly, but no, as soon as, they close the door and they're in a different meeting and you're not there, you're getting stabbed in the back. So it's even harder here in California to sort out, who's on your side and who isn't. It's funny, but it's all cutthroat. Totally. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about some of the acting gigs. I mean, I've heard that you've done your work with O.J. Simpson and George Clooney, and those are probably two of the names that come up quite often. But maybe tell us about your O.J. story.
Well, yeah. So again, now I'm an actor in L.A. I've just moved to Los Angeles. I'm still spying, and still sort of broke. And one day my manager says, "Hey, I got a gig for you." Doing a exercise video. And I said, oh, no. I can't dance. I'm the worst dancer in the history of mankind. And he said, no, it's an exercise video. You're not going to be dancing. You're going to be, doing push-ups and, calisthenics. They want guys, and I'm like, and he says, come on, it's O.J. Simpson. And I said, what? Yeah, he says, O.J. Simpson is doing an exercise video for men. I'm like, oh my God, I love O.J. Simpson. I'm in. Okay, great. So I show up, the first day on the set and we're shooting in a dance studio. And I get introduced to this guy who's the choreographer. And I'm like, whoa. I didn't know there was the dancing. No. And all of a sudden, the choreographer is like, okay, claps his hands, and there are two women, me and another guy, and OJ. And he does this crazy routine. The women do it instantly. Even OJ's not too bad. And I am so bad. I am struggling. I'm sweating. And he comes over to me and he's literally going to fire me. He's like, he literally said, how did you get here? How did you get this job? And he's about to fire me. And OJ says, no. Rob's making me look good. Rob's got to stay. So my bad dancing was making OJ's dancing look good. And, you know, the number one rule in Hollywood is make the star look good. And so the craziest thing happened because my dancing made OJ look good. For some reason, he and I bonded. I became his best friend on the set. You know, at one point he takes me aside and you know, again, this is, you know, 1994, I think the video was shot. And he pops in a video cassette. He goes, hey, you want to see the pilot I just shot for NBC? I'm the lead in this new series. And it's called Frogman. And he pops in the thing. He says, get ready for this. He said, my character is a knife expert.
You are kidding.
You cannot make this stuff up. No.
Wow.
I know. And
wow.
so, you know, so we do this whole video. I'm OJ's best friend. I'm like, he's going to get me on Frogman. I'm going to get a part on Frogman, you know? And, of course, a few days after the video, we finish shooting it. He's driving down the 405 in the Bronco, on the run from the law because obviously they arrested him for the murders of, Ron Goldman and his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. And, from that point on, OJ has remained in my life. You know, the exercise video was introduced into evidence in his trial. And indeed, they just a couple of years ago, they did a whole big series on OJ. I think it was on FX with Cuba Gooding played OJ.
Yeah.
And in one of the episodes, they recreated the exercise video, which means an actor got hired to play me.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well done. And I mean, any observations did you have at the time about OJ's character? Did it, I mean, obviously you were probably surprised, but I mean, is that something that you thought was in the realm of possibility when you met with OJ?
Well, you know, again, I don't want to spoil it because this is a good one. There are things he said to me, which I delineate in the chapter, that were pretty unbelievable in terms of what he told me. Yeah, in private.
Incredible. Yeah, no, this sounds like a page turner, so I can't wait to get into this book. Again, the book is called Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. Robert, as you know, like in this podcast, we like to focus on investing and entrepreneurialism. And so I'm really interested in your journey from actor to author, right? Because it's very difficult for most people to be successful authors. And Ruse is not your first book, right? I believe it's your second book. I believe your first book was Malibu Burning, which I believe focuses on the 2018 fires in Malibu, which is where you live. And so generally speaking, it is very difficult for anyone to break into the successful author world. I mean, to write a book, find a publisher, publish it, promote it, sell it. Tell us a little bit more about that journey and how did you decide to write a book and how did you actually become a successful published author?
Well, you know, look, there are three parts to a book, right? There's the writing the book, there's the getting the book published, and there's the promoting the book. And I have to tell you, all three are incredibly difficult. You know, we all know writing a book is hard because, you know, not many people do it. And you know, and there are a lot of bad books out there, unfortunately, too. And so we know that's hard, but getting a book published, incredibly difficult. Promoting it is unbelievably difficult as well, because nowadays the author is expected to do most of the promotion themselves. Fortunately, I have a background in car sales, so now instead of selling cars, I'm selling books. But you know, I think for your listeners out there, what I tell people is what I did was I wanted to write a book. So I started a writers group in my town, Malibu, the Malibu Writers Circle. And the reason I did it is because you need somebody to read your work. You know, there's got to be a number of listeners right now that they're like, I always wanted to write my memoir, or I always wanted to write the story of my grandfather who fought in World War II, or I always wanted to write a nonfiction book about how I figured out how to beat the NASDAQ, or how I figured out how to, trade options, or how I, whatever your business is, and that's a really good market, for writing nonfiction, is if you have some sort of business that you've been successful in, you can write a book about that, and people want to learn about that, just like the listeners to your show. They want to learn how to invest better, right? So I think that having a writer's group is a great way to have people read your writing, give you feedback, and it's free. Now you can go to writing conferences, which I've done and I recommend, but you have to pay for those. That can get into a little bit of money. Whereas a writer's group, it's free. And if I didn't have my writer's group, I don't think I would publish anything, because I have people that are really committed, and they're also talented writers, and we're sharing our information, and there's no holds barred. And it really helps you improve your writing, And so for your listeners, if you're out there and you're writing a book, even if you're going to self-publish your book, and there is a time and a place that I think self-publishing is better than trying to go with a traditional publisher. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I think you have to just make sure that your book is extremely well edited. Because, once the book is published, it's too late to, change it. I mean, I guess theoretically self-publishing now, you can just resubmit a new version of it, so it's a little different from traditional publishing in that sense. So if there is a typo or whatever, but you don't want that, you don't want to use 2,000 exclamation points. There are a lot of things that writers sometimes do that maybe, because they haven't had anybody look at it, or they haven't had professional people look at it, they do things that kind of give themselves away as a less experienced writer or beginning writer. Overuse of exclamation points is a pretty big one. Typos, obviously you don't want a book with any typos. So I think that that's really a great way to do it. And I encourage everybody, everybody's got a story to tell. I really believe that. And, I teach writing here in the city of Malibu now, creative writing. And man, people come in and they sit down and they start telling me the story they want to write. And I'm literally blown away. I'm like, that's an unbelievable story. So everybody's got a story to tell. The challenge is the execution of that incredible story. And that's where I think we often think of writers as just sitting in a room by themselves. But I'm here to tell you, there's no writer that gets a book published without a lot of help from a lot of people. So make sure you're getting help from other people.
I think that's great advice. And getting back to your first book, how did you know where to get help? I mean, did you take creative writing classes? Did you seek out a publisher or an editor right off the bat? Or like, what was the process, the creative process in your first book?
Well, so even before the first book, so, and this is part of Ruse too, after the crash of 2008, and I take that job in corporate America, eventually that job flamed out. They fired me. They paid me no bonus. All the things they had told me they were going to do, they didn't do any of them. It was just all a ruse. And I was so down, I was so depressed that one day I sat and I wrote a suicide note. Now, the suicide note wasn't me contemplating suicide, though obviously I was really down in the dumps, but it was this character. I'd met this crazy guy in my travels, and he always struck me that he would be a great character to write a book around. And all of a sudden I started writing in his voice, and all of a sudden I wrote a story that he was going to jump off a cruise ship because he was so down in the dump, And I read it to an actor friend of mine, and he said, you should write a book about that, And so I did. I wrote a book. I wrote it in the notes program on my iPad, which I do not recommend. So no grammar, no punctuation. I never stopped to censor or edit anything. And when I finished, and I finished that book, it was terrible. It was as bad as a book could be. But there was something in the story that was true, right? Because I was going through a very difficult emotional time. So this character was going through there was something in that really was compelling. And the few people that I showed it to were like, that's a great story and that's compelling, but your writing needs some work, right? And that was when I came up with the idea of starting a writer's group, and then started working on that book. And it's funny because that was the first thing that I wrote, and that book is now finished. It's been rewritten countless times, but it's now out on submission with my agent. And I'm hoping, knock on wood, that one day soon I'm going to have some good news about that book, and that book is going to get sold, which would be really amazing because that's where it all started. And I'll just briefly, I'll just tell you the title of the book. It's Sex, Rugs, and Rock and Roll. And it's the story of a carpet con man. And again, it's fun. It should be funny. My writing, I like to write page turners that have a little bit of suspense, a little bit of a con, but they're also fun.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. And so another amazing thing that's happened since you published the book Ruse is now it's becoming a TV miniseries. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's in development for a series, and one of the first people to really take a shine to Ruse was Frank Abagnale, who wrote Catch Me If You Can, which of course was turned into a great movie with Tom Hanks and Leonardo DiCaprio. And Frank Abagnale, I call him Mr. A now, he read my book and he flipped over it and he gave me this blurb that was so wonderful that the publisher put it on the cover of the book. And so when you have a book that has Frank Abagnale on your cover, people in Hollywood notice that and we're like, wait a second, Frank Abagnale likes this book. Whoa, we got to, And so a production company reached out to me, and they're a great production company. They have many shows on TV, and we got a showrunner who's kind of like the CEO of the TV series, who handles, the writing, the directing, the acting, the sets, like everything, right? And now we've been developing how the season will go, how future seasons will go. So it's very exciting. They've really had me very involved, which is great, because a lot of times, they just, say, author, here you go, here's your option check, and then they push you out the door. You're lucky if they don't trip you as they push you. But they've been really wonderful. They want me involved because they know there are a lot of stories that aren't in the book, because, the book is whatever, 275 pages, it's not a long book, but, I did this job for 20 years. So there are a lot more stories that aren't in the book, and they know that. And if you get a TV series, even George R.R. Martin, who had, 700 page books, by the end of season 5, I think they ran out of his material, and the showrunners had to kind of create their own material. Right. So, it's really exciting. I don't know, because we haven't started shooting yet. I don't know when that's going to be. And then from that point, I don't know how long it is until we're theoretically, on air. But it's very exciting. And so, knock on wood, it happens, because in Hollywood, I never believe anything until you're literally sitting on the set and there's somebody going action, because things can happen. But it's very far down the road.
And that's not just getting back to corporate America is the same. It's not only Hollywood. In corporate America, if you ever have a manager or a boss or somebody who promises you something, always in the back of my mind, it's like every time some senior manager promises me something at work, in the back of my mind, it's like, there's probably like a 20% chance that's going to come true at best.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. I'll take 20%. That's pretty good. I'll take 20%,
And so, Rob, do you have a cameo role in that TV miniseries?
It's funny. The showrunner at one point suggested that I play my father in the TV show, because my father's a big part of the book. He's kind of the heart of the book. Man, when he said that, it really got me. I got choked up because I hadn't thought about it. Obviously, I was an actor, haven't really acted much for quite some time. Not really interested in acting. It's very hard business. And I like writing better. And, again, I can do writing sort of on my own, whereas acting requires a whole different level of involvement, driving to auditions, driving all around Los Angeles, whereas, writing, you get to sit in your little, I write from a converted tool shack, so I think the answer is I don't want to do that. But look, if all of a sudden we're casting and, Leonardo DiCaprio passes on playing my father, and, a bunch of other famous people pass on playing my father, and all of a sudden the guy they're going to hire is no more well-known than I am, I might say, hey, you know what, let me give it a crack too. But I don't think so.
And Robert, briefly speaking about your father, I mean, I guess one point is when your book gets published, at that point, there are no secrets, right? Your family, your friends, everyone knows what you've been up to. At what point did your parents, or did you tell your parents that, look, this is what I've been doing for the past 5-10 years, and it's kind of like this really strange, morally questionable espionage life?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact, date or year, but again, it's in Ruse. And, my father was very bummed out, because, here I kind of turned sort of turned my nose up at the dishonesty of car sales, and now I'm doing corporate spying, corporate espionage, which is far worse. And he was very worried that I was going to, go to prison, and kept making all these suggestions for me to find ways to not have to lie to get the information, and so yeah, he was very worried about it.
But Robert, I'm very happy that you made it out okay, that you didn't end up in prison. I'm very glad that you are here to speak to us today. Where can people find your book?
I love to steer people to my website. It's just my name, robertkerbeck.com, Kerbeck, because first of all, the trailer for the Ruse series is on there, so you can kind of get a sense of what the series may look like. Give you a good sense of that. You can also buy Ruse from wherever you like to buy books. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, local bookstore. You could also buy Malibu Burning, because that's a pretty intense story. Obviously, wildfires have become a huge thing, not just in California but all over the world. Unfortunately, losing a lot of people and homes, and the environmental issues related to wildfires are incredible. So that's a book I'm very proud of. It won a couple of national awards, and you can also read a whole bunch of different things that are on there. So robertkerbeck.com.
Perfect. Any last minute tidbits or tips that you want to give our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I always tell people, I've had so many careers, right? Car salesman, actor, executive in, corporate America, writer. I know I'm missing one in there, spy. I tell people, take the journey you want to take. Don't take the journey your mom or dad want you to take. Don't take the journey your spouse wants you to take. Don't take the journey that your brother wants you to take, or your boss wants you to take. Take the journey you want to take. Especially, coming out of COVID, I lost a dear friend during COVID, and, life is short. So do what you want to do with your life.
Very well said. Robert, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Again, the book is called Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. I can't wait to read it. And thanks again for taking the time. There it is. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Gabe.
Thanks.